In my world there is music and good vibes and laughter and lovers, adventure and friendship. We know who we are.
Welcome to Be the Wellness Podcast, where we help you master your body, mind, and the experience of life through insightful conversation, interviews with experts and thought leaders, all with a side of marital banter and some good old-fashioned humor.
Yes, we are your hosts, Adam and Vanessa Lambert, and we're committed to helping you live life fully expressed physically, mentally, and experientially. Sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join the conversation.
Hello and welcome, everybody, to Be the Wellness Podcast. Adam and Vanessa Lambert coming at you from Wilson, Wyoming.
Wilson, Wyoming, the Wild Wild West.
Wild, Wild West of Wilson, Wyoming.
Even though we're less west than we were before, I feel more attached to it being the Wild West.
Well, no, this is like the state. It's what it says on the sign, always west. Or no, forever west.
Oh, forever west.
Wyoming,
okay,
forever
perfect.
west.
It doesn't say forever wild.
No. Nope.
Well, we are really stoked about this podcast. And, you know, we get into it a little bit in the podcast, but I will just say, that my dad had a very serious health scare this last summer that really relates to this podcast, really relates to thyroid health. And so I just really hope you guys will listen to this, think about the importance of your thyroid, get it checked, really manage it, make sure that like this is something that is optimized in your life because it really has profound effects on your health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And it's like, and these are things you can move the needle on early if you're paying attention with really pretty basic stuff like eat this vegetable instead of that one.
Yeah, exactly. We like when things are easy.
Yeah, for sure.
So I also want to just mention that we have an amazing group right now in Authentic Self. And that program is just rocking people. It is like the volume, the energy, the frequency is turned up maximum in that situation right now. So if it's something that you've been considering, that program I've been coaching for close to 5 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, really cool to see how it's changed and expanded and grown and recalibrated. And it's just really, really amazing right now. So if that's something that's been on your radar, I just invite you to activate and get in there. It is right now is it's one of these times where we really have to be on top of our mental game. We really have to be on top of our emotional game because we're up against big frequencies right now, big changes, big dilemmas, big, a lot of pushback. So it's like to have these tools, to have access to these kind of, to have access to the control of your own well-being and your own state of sovereignty is just priceless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we are really staring down the barrel of another potential year of uncertainty, and it's like even the toughest amongst us are like, oh man, I don't know if I can do another one.
You have to have your tools now. Yeah. And if you don't, it's showing up. So, it's just a glaring problem. And it's just like, why suffer? Just get the tools and,
get the tools, do the things
and be happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something to be said about, the feeling that you have when you're doing something positive for yourself, like that in and of itself, just, with the exception of buying a gym membership and never going, like that, I think is bad for you. But, anything that you feel as though you're investing in your own well-being pays dividends, and we all could use it right now.
Oh my gosh. Last year, you and I invested so much in ourselves, so much in recalibrating ourselves for these new times, for these new frequencies we're in. And it is paying off. I think we're feeling the shift of that from a year of really investing in ourselves, both financially, energetically, all of the above, because we could feel that the time was asking for it. It was like, okay, the old paradigm has shifted. how do we adapt? How do we pivot?
Right.
And how do we stay on top of our own, internal game so that the outer world can reflect that? So, now is the time, whether it's authentic self, whatever it is, it's just time to invest in yourself, in your ability to activate powerfully in these uncertain times.
In these uncertain times. It's such a weird thing. That's like that's a phrase.
I know, because what times are certain?
I know, but it's like it's on so that like that gets played on like the recordings in the grocery store. Please keep 2 cart links between you. We thank you for keeping us safe in these uncertain times.
Oh, that is funny, huh?
You know what I mean? You're like,
it's like
welcome to
programmed
Elysium.
into you.
Yeah, it's so weird, but not to take anything away from authentic self. These are uncertain times, and if you are feeling uncertain about what's going on, now is definitely a time. Because I know the majority of the people that are in authentic self right now. And if you're feeling uncertain about anything, jump in with them and you'll feel amazing.
You'll feel so much more certain.
You'll feel so much more certain. You're like, oh, I'm certain that I belong here with these awesome people.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, folks, here's Dr. Alan Christensen.
And we are live. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. C.
Hey, thanks for having me, you guys. Glad to be here with you.
It's so, I was going to say exciting because I love that word, but it's not actually, it's a little different than exciting. It's actually really, I guess, pertinent to what's going on in my life and our life, especially in this last year that we have this conversation. And a lot of our audience and folks out there realize that my dad actually had a very significant health scare this year. And, it was discovered that he had a pretty bad case of hyperthyroidism that he kind of ignored. And it, caused some heart damage, which caused some irregularity in his heart rhythm, which caused an emergency trip to the ER and then a cardiovert, which landed him in a coma. And so on and on it goes. And we had a really scary few months really with him kind of going in and out of really some pretty dangerous zones with this heart. So this book and this subject matter is kind of near and dear to my heart right now. And so I wanted to kick it off with, obviously we're talking about thyroid disease in the new book. And, we had you on last time for the Metabolic Reset book, and this is the Thyroid Reset Diet. And I really want to just kick off with, if you could give us an overview of really like the function of the thyroid and really kind of the role it plays in our systems.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry about your dad's journey, and hopefully that's all landed well. But,
yeah, he's coming around. Yeah. Thank you.
The thyroid's a big deal, and your story illustrates that.
Yep.
It's a little thing. It's not even the mass of a deck of cards, and it controls how quickly most reactions occur in the body. So it affects cardiac rate, also repair of the lining of the blood vessels, basal metabolic rate, repair of connective tissues, and the speed at which nerve impulses travel throughout the brain. So it does a lot. Last couple of decades, thyroid disease has tripled, and it affects both genders, and many people struggle with it.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think one of the things that I want to kind of step the audience through is, what would be your first indication to look for issues with the thyroid? You maybe are getting your normal checkups. Maybe you're even, in the clear, in the normal ranges, as we know so many people are, but maybe that's not quite telling the full story. What are some signs or symptoms that you could look for to say, maybe something is not quite calibrated right here?
Yeah. So good orienting thought is, first off, if there are any symptoms that are not typical for you. There's a big clue about that. So one big study looked at about 20,000 people, and it did symptom surveys and matched those up to thyroid blood levels. And they worded symptoms in 2 ways. One was static, like things you've always had, and one was dynamic, things that have changed. And it was the dynamic symptoms that were very predictive. So yeah, if you've always had, you always get tired in the afternoon your whole life, that may not be it. But if you didn't before and now you're wiped out, that could be relevant. So fatigue that's not explained, the response of your body weight, that's different. You used to have a pattern that worked well enough for you, and now that pattern doesn't work. That's suspicious. So those are 2 big ones. Brain fog, changes in menstrual cycles, Skin, hair, nail health can be different. And then also we'll see a lot of digestive symptoms can tie in.
It's just
So kind of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's the whole Megillah.
Yeah, it's a lot. By and large, if there's some issues that are out of the norm for you that are not otherwise explained, it's good to think hard about the thyroid being possibly related.
Yeah, being in there somewhere. So in some other conversation that I've had with somebody on this podcast related to thyroid, there was a discussion that came up around lab ranges and how in some cases, if you just were to go to let's say your family practitioner and get a thyroid panel, that it may not be as telling as a more tightly controlled lab that you might get from, say, an endocrinologist or something would be. Is that still the case, or have things sort of normalized to some degree around diagnostics?
Well, yeah, the normal ranges are good places if you're doing a screening test, just if you have no symptoms. But if you are symptomatic, they may not be enough. What happens is that normal ranges represent an average for those who get tested. And the tough part is that most people that get thyroid tests get them for good reason. They've got symptoms. Yeah, they're on ongoing treatment. But when you look at how thyroid scores fluctuate in people that are free of thyroid problems, that's a narrower range. There's a lot of thyroid tests available. The one that has the biggest difference between healthy scores and average scores is one called the TSH. And that's your brain telling your thyroid to work. It's backward. So the lazier your thyroid is, the more it gets yelled at and the higher the number goes. So labs say that you're normal between about 0.4 and 4.5, but people that are the healthiest, their scores, the bottom end is about the same, but the top end is more like 2.
Wow. So then that would indicate that if you're so let's say you're a 4.5 versus a 2, that your brain is really doing a lot of yelling at that point, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and for sure a 6 is worse than a 2 or a 2.5. That's more significant yet. But you could still be in that normal range on the upper side of it and have some issues that are brewing.
So let's talk about why so many people are having thyroid issues and obviously we know autoimmune disease is on the rise. What's really going on in the general public where we're seeing this huge influx of more thyroid disease?
Well, yeah, the rates have tripled last couple decades, and what's happened in that same time frame is that iodine intake has changed. So back in 92, there was 112 nations on the earth that were categorized as severely iodine deficient. And that was a real problem. By 2014, the public health efforts successfully brought that number down to 0. So really cool. However, in that same time frame, the numbers of countries that were at risk for thyroid disease due to iodine excess, well, that used to be 0. Now it's at 52. And the United States is one of those countries.
Wow. And so is that, it's funny, not humorously funny. It's peculiar that one of the topics, we're pretty deeply steeped over the last 10 or 12 years in the kind of paleo and ancestral health community. And one of the things that has been a topic in that world for a while is iodine deficiency. And that for people who are eating a quote unquote, ancestral type diet, which is predominantly meat and vegetables and sort of eschewing grains, legumes, and dairy, that they can in fact be, iodine deficient. And so I'm curious, what is the connection here? So like, how did so many countries prior to 1993 or whatever, how were they all iodine deficient? And is it because they were eating kind of a non-standard diet, and then more processed food brings in more iodine, or what's the kind of connection there?
Sometimes iodine can come in from processed foods. It's in almost all food, and there's a decent amount in nearly all animal protein. The groups that have developed actual deficiencies have been pretty obscure. It's really like raw food vegans. And the countries that were deficient, we talk about how cool it is to have local food. Well, if that's all you have and your local soils suck, they're not very nutritionally dense, then you can get deficient. So the areas that were considered severely deficient, they had no iodine fortification in their salt. they had pretty meager diets, not a lot of animal protein, not a lot of food variety, and they had poor quality soils, and all their food came from those soils.
Got it. Man, it's the whole circle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Take care of your dirt because it takes care of you.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to just kind of put myself in the eyes or the body or the vision of the listener, because you're like, okay, here's this fun fact about iodine, and you're going, okay, well, how do I know what to avoid? How do I know what to have more of? And this is really what the book is about. It's about kind of resetting that system, making sure that you're kind of at the right level. So maybe you can step us through what that process actually looks like.
Yeah. So for those that have thyroid disease, and this is the thing that the new thing we've uncovered is that there's a big range in how much extra iodine people can tolerate, how much they can accommodate. There's not a big range in how much we require from person to person. By and large, predictable amounts provide sufficiency. But some people can take extra and do fine. Others get extra and they develop thyroid disease. So the book makes it really simple. You're not avoiding all iodine, and you shouldn't. Iodine's not the bad guy. We need it. So the book gives plenty of good food sources that contain reasonable amounts. But if someone wishes to reverse thyroid disease, the idea is to be at a level low enough to allow the thyroid to get rid of extra iodine. So I broke down all the foods into green, yellow, and red light. So to reset your thyroid, you eat green light foods. It's that easy. And once your levels have corrected, then you can safely have a bit more and not run into problems. So then the maintenance phase is, still stay with the green light foods, but you can throw in 1 or 2 yellow light foods per day and not have any problems.
Got it. So, and this really applies to both hyper and hypo, right? There really isn't any difference in terms of the approach with the diet for both sides of the spectrum, correct?
You're correct. And that's kind of a bizarre thing. But
it is,
What happens is the two diseases are just about identical. Nearly all hypothyroidism is caused by Hashimoto's, probably 97% or more. Hyperthyroidism, when it comes on spontaneously, about 80% of the time it's caused by a thing called Graves' disease. Now, with Hashimoto's, your immune system attacks the parts of your thyroid that make hormone. And with Graves', your immune system attacks the parts of the thyroid that tell it to release hormone. So, they're almost the same molecules that are attacked, but one molecule causes the gland to get broken down where it can't work, and the other molecule is like a short circuit on the doorbell where the gland thinks it's being talked to when it's not.
And this is why, isn't it quite common for it to swing from side to side? You might start hyper and then end up hypo after a while.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of overlap between those conditions. You're right. And so about 30-40% of those that have Graves also have the antibodies for Hashimoto's. And as they stabilize, they may slow down and end up becoming hypothyroid.
So, okay. So what I'm wondering about is you get to the point where obviously you are kind of in deep trouble with the condition of your thyroid. Maybe you're hyper and the physician is, or, your physician is recommending you ablate part of your thyroid. And, you do the diet and it doesn't work. I mean, at that point, do you still recommend? Because I think you said in the book about 80% of people respond well to it, right? They respond well to this reset, so to speak.
Yeah. So the studies that have been done in terms of those response rates were for hypothyroidism secondary to Hashimoto's, and then also subclinical hypothyroidism. So hypothyroid states, roughly 78% respond within 3 months. And by respond, I mean like completely normalize. It's pretty cool. Hyperthyroidism, having too much thyroid hormone worsens your immune system. So it takes some step to stop that excess. And once that step is taken, avoiding extra iodine goes a long ways towards helping you recover more quickly. So it can fully reverse hypothyroid in many cases by itself. Hyperthyroidism, it still warrants doing some treatment to move out of the hyperthyroidism initially.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know so many clients and people that I've spoken with over the years who've gotten that procedure, right? They've had either part of their thyroid or even the whole thing at some points ablated. And now you're really just committed to a lifetime of management, right?
Yeah, hyperthyroidism, the treatments are medications to slow the thyroid, radioactive ablation, or surgical removal of the thyroid. And there are some situations to where if someone has like acute cardiac damage where they need to have it changed immediately. So that can push the decisions one way or another. If all options are on the table, the medications that slow the thyroid have a really good chance of letting someone have normal thyroid function afterward if they end up being low enough in iodine.
Got it.
So on the right, so the kind of the more advanced, and I guess this is probably true for most things in as far as disease states goes, but kind of the farther down the path you get with it, the kind of more limited you are in treatments and procedures. And so this, paying some amount of attention to the iodine that you're getting as a preventative step seems smart as well, right? So is there like is there any hereditary stuff with this? So if you could say like, oh, okay, well, my dad had hypothyroidism and I don't have any symptoms, but I feel like maybe I should be on a iodine sort of cognizant diet.
Yeah, for sure. So genes can affect one's risk. Honestly, anyone is wise to avoid the big iodine outliers. Anyone can have the disease triggered. And Vanessa, if a quick thought about this, I don't know your dad's situation or what type he had, but the genes that trigger thyroid disease are mostly X-linked. And a man has one X chromosome to give, a woman has two. So your mom had two X chromosomes. She could have given you either. She might have had one that carried thyroid disease, one that didn't. But if she had thyroid disease, you would be more at risk. But, maybe you got the lucky one. So as a female, when your father has thyroid disease, if it were one that came on spontaneously, he has just that one X chromosome. So you got one of mom's X's and dad's only X. So the odds of that in those cases are much higher.
Well, yeah. And I know that this is a hereditary thing on my dad's side of the family because my aunt also has Graves' disease. And so it's definitely something that's top of the mind for me. And it's interesting because my dad's he's in Prescott there. So I had talked to your publicist to refer him over to you. So I might send him your way actually. But so it is something that's top of mind for me because, there's actually my family, there's kind of very few things besides like alcoholism that runs in my lineage. It's that good old Irish Italian combo, but the thyroidism thing is there for me. So it is something that I'm in tune to, and it's one of the many reasons why we're very careful about the way we eat and very cognizant about how we nourish ourselves. So. I appreciate that.
Learn about these big iodine outliers, avoid them, get enough selenium. You'll go a long ways towards cutting your risk.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Interesting that you just brought up selenium, because this is one selenium. I feel as though it gets, I don't want to say it gets a bad rap. What's the opposite of a bad rap? It gets included in a lot of things, right? As like, oh, well, I'm not really concerned about the mercury levels in salmon because it has so much selenium, right? And so there's like these interesting things that where it gets interjected into the conversation. And so how is it? And I mean, we can go like some of our folks are pretty into the kind of nerdy stuff, so we can kind of go deep in this. But how is it that selenium is offsetting or impacting the iodine levels, and what's that relationship?
Yeah, and I like your perspective on this. It's not that it's a magic tonic that makes everything perfect, but basically I mentioned how people have different levels of tolerance for extra iodine. Now, if someone were selenium deficient, their tolerance would be more narrow. So maybe they could do okay with up to 250 micrograms per day when things work well. If they're also low in selenium, they may only tolerate an extra 200 micrograms per day. So yeah, the same problems can still show up, but if one's low in selenium, they're just even more sensitive to things.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of this idea that there's a range in people, right? Or in how much actual iodine that people can handle, like what that threshold is interesting. And I'm curious if it's, do you see that range is narrowed in somebody who has a history of thyroid disease? Meaning that like once you have thyroid disease, you become less able to tolerate an iodine load, or is it the other way around?
No, that's definitely true. And even at that, I mean, even just population averages, the World Health Organization has looked at all these examples of places that are fortified with iodine. Denmark did it last for a big country, and they did it flawlessly. They wanted to go up by an average of 50 micrograms per day, and they nailed it. Now, they've got really thorough tracking systems, and they knew that there could be problems that emerged, so they watched it all. And for 15 years running after they fortified, they saw an average of 45 to 60% annual increases of all types of thyroid disease for all those years. So the World Health Organization has said that between 50 to 200 micrograms is a safe range in general. And those prone to thyroid disease really should not deviate from that.
Yeah, sticking in that range. And so then if you I believe I was reading in the book where you were talking about reducing all of these the sort of the known heavy iodine foods, right? So we reduce these things and kind of get iodine levels down, and hopefully the thyroid kind of comes back online and is able to handle the current load, and then much like any other sort of quasi elimination type diet, that over time you might be able to add some of these things back in and just kind of see how your body's reacting to that. And is it to tie this back to our last conversation, is it kind of a situation where similar to the liver, right? When the liver is completely full of energy, whether it's from stored glycogen or hopefully not fat. Once it's full, then it spills out into everything else. And if you can do enough work to sort of drain the storage tank to an appropriate level, then all of a sudden you can buffer a lot more space or a lot more energy, so to speak. So is it a similar situation kind of with the iodine in the thyroid, that like once we get it down to this certain threshold, then everything becomes a little more liberal, I should say, with your diet?
Yeah, it's totally similar. So there's a protein called thyroglobulin your thyroid uses to make hormones. And kind of like you got a big van that's got like 13 seats in it. So you've got 13 different spots called tyrosol residues on which iodine can attach to thyroglobulin. However, when the thyroid's in a high iodine state, you can have as many as 60 atoms floating around on each molecule of thyroglobulin. So the bus is crowded. And what that does is the thyroid slows down. If it didn't slow down, it would just make up so much extra hormone that everyone would get cardiac damage. So extra iodine slows your thyroid. And then all those extra people wandering around that can't get proper seats on the bus, they trigger the immune system to start attacking it. So that's the thing that we're reversing.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's so many parallels. It's like when we start talking about buses and seats, I start thinking about, low density lipoproteins, right? And you're like, oh my God, they're just like triglycerides. It's all of these things are,
they all work the same.
Yeah, exactly. They all work with like a gas tank and a municipal transportation like analogy.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, obviously, some of the foods that you're talking about that have a lot of iodine are like baked goods and such stuff like that. Are there foods that go in and actually absorb or sort of scrape some of the iodine out of the system that can kind of counteract that? Or is it literally just the levels that go in, your body can either buffer it or it can't?
Yeah, it's more so what goes in. Our bodies are very good at assimilating iodine. We don't have a lot of ways to get rid of the extra, but we're really good at taking it in. We can actually breathe it in. They've shown that if you got a little hut by the ocean and there's like massive kelp beds that have washed ashore, you'll get iodine from that. It comes in topically. And one thing I mentioned in the book, there's a whole lot of skincare products and beauty products that are giving us unsafe amounts of iodine. We've got tons of it in various sources.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's all of these things. We talk about skincare a lot actually in our community and how important just knowing what's in your products, especially your body lotion, you know, something you slather on your skin every day, all day. And you wouldn't even think of iodine as a suspect ingredient.
Well, it's a really useful molecule. You know, it makes things not get rancid. It makes creams stay mixed together evenly. It makes them nice and smooth. However, we absorb it. You know, a couple of years ago, the FDA restricted its use in hand sanitizers because too many hospital workers who used it were getting thyroid disease. And now there's talk about it being restricted from personal care products. Hasn't happened just yet, but yeah, I've run the math on that, and you can get if 200 micrograms is your safe upper limit, you can take a shower and come out and absorb 2,000 micrograms from your conditioner alone.
Wow, that's incredible. So that's yeah, man. And we hear about all of these, you know, all of the different stuff about skincare, you know, from saving orangutans to like watching out for BPA in bottles and all of this stuff. And this is, it's really hard for me to believe that this is the first time this information is like crossing my desk, so to speak, around like what can be like, because this is a significant thing. I mean, we see so many clients, you know, and given the kind of our audience and the proclivity towards the sort of ancestral health world, which tends to attract a lot of people that have some sort of underlying immune condition, right? But so we might even be like a hotter population than sort of the more general population for this. But there's so many people in our community that have some sort of thyroiditis. So, you know, non-Hashimoto's thyroiditis or hypo or hyper. There's it's like the thing that everybody's got going on. And yeah, and this is the first time I've heard about it being a transdermal absorption issue.
Well, and a little more depth on that. There are many cases like food, for example, to where if you're cutting out junk food, you're skipping out on a whole lot of stuff in one big swath, right? It's not the case. Like this scenario doesn't transfer over for skincare. There's a lot of good natural ones that have kelp extracts or seaweed extracts. And they're there for the same purposes that other versions of iodine are there for. They do nice stuff. They make it handy to make a nice lotion. But yeah, it comes straight into your system.
Yeah. And that's like particularly insidious because you think, oh, kelp extract, that's got to be really good for me. You know, I mean, that's like exactly what I'm looking for is more, you know, natural, you know, sort of products that can do these things. So that's interesting. So I want to kind of shift a little bit into how the thyroid interplays with metabolic health. And we know, especially now in the era of COVID, that metabolic health and it's just one of those comorbidities that seems to be really problematic for folks, you know, especially here in the United States. And so I'd like to just kind of dovetail these things together, and maybe we can talk a little bit about, you know, how efficiency in the thyroid or a properly running thyroid plays in with metabolic health, and how this is all connected with you know, the current COVID scenario.
Yeah, for sure. So the thyroid is the biggest single factor, bar none, that governs the overall basal metabolic rate, more so than any other variable. For probably about a decade and a half, we measured resting basal metabolic rate in people that had thyroid disease and compared that against other controls. And you know, typically per how much lean body mass someone carries, barring thyroid disease, that's by far the biggest predictor. You know, we think about like gender differences or age differences in metabolism, and they track exactly to lean body mass. You know, guys generally have more lean body mass. Older people generally have less. But once you look at lean body mass, by and large, that's metabolic rate, with the exception of thyroid disease. We've shown that many people that have thyroid disease may have a 60% lower basal metabolic rate than they would otherwise. And I can think of just a couple different scenarios. Like I remember one woman that talked about just her struggles, that she was, you know, trying to do all the right things and following these various diets or whatnot. And she was still, you know, 60 pounds above where she wanted to be. And we saw her basal metabolic rate was about like 830 calories at rest. And so for her to actually lose weight, she would need a deficit of 400 to 500 calories, which means she couldn't eat, you know, and that there's no way there could be any healthy weight loss that would occur. And she said, yeah, I barely eat and I keep gaining. And I saw her numbers. I said, yeah, you're vindicated. You know, that's totally true. And I think of another woman I saw that her body weight was fine, but she was saying how it was so hard for her to maintain that. And my first my first thought was skeptical, like, oh, you look like you're naturally thin. And she explained her scenario. She was logging and tracking to the nth degree, and she would never exceed like 1,200 calories per day. I'm a runner. I get what this means. She averaged 8 miles per day of running, and she ate that little. And anything short of that, she would gain weight. So that's how much thyroid disease can affect someone's metabolism.
That's remarkable. And so in both of those cases, that would be hypothyroid.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just
funny thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Hyperthyroid, there's often thought that if too little thyroid causes weight gain, then extra must cause weight loss. And it's kind of a bizarre thing. At the extremes of hyperthyroidism, there is a loss of muscle tissue and a loss of bone mass. So no healthy weight loss. But most people who are mildly hyperthyroid or even moderately hyperthyroid, their increased appetite is more significant than their increased metabolism.
Right.
And they still have weight struggles as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that the man, that's the one that always gets you. It's like having a treadmill desk. You're like, oh, this is great. I can walk 15 miles, 20, 30 miles a day. And then you're like, eat 7 times the amount of food. That's
based
a
on a
tricky
true
one.
story.
Yeah. Based on experience. Yeah.
I know that from endurance training too. I can easily want to refuel much more than I need to refuel.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, there's an interesting psychological piece to it. There's always the thing of like, oh, I'm, working so hard. I can buffer this, extra, whatever it is that's going on. And then of course, just, the mental component of being hungry. So, I wonder, because there's in the sort of, bodybuilding, I suppose, realm, mostly, there are people who experiment with taking thyroid to increase their metabolism and lose body fat. It's not one that I've done a tremendous amount of reading on. And I think that now there might be some, other ways of doing this that are more popular, but that seems like a really sort of sketchy approach, given everything that we've just talked about with, ensuring that this thing is operating correctly. Is that something that you have ever come across, people coming in and saying, hey, look, I did a cycle of thyroid, exogenous thyroid.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And I've seen countless people that have had congestive heart failure from doing that. And it doesn't even work in the ways they hope, but it does work in ways they wouldn't expect. So I mentioned about TSH, and it's a signal from the brain telling the thyroid to work, but it's used for a lot of things. It's also used for the brain cells to repair themselves. And it's used to repair cardiac tissue, So when that's too low because of too much thyroid, a lot of things that normally would get rebuilt don't get rebuilt.
Oh, that's interesting. So the TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, right? Is right. So even in the name is a little deceiving, because it would lead you to believe that the only thing that it does is stimulate hormone, or thyroid. But it's so it has some actual protective properties in and of itself.
So in the world of endocrinology, hormones work by acting on receptors. Like there's specific locks waiting for specific keys. And one of several things unique about thyroid hormones is that there's not a cell in the body that lacks thyroid hormone receptors. Estrogen, there's receptors in the uterus and the breast tissue and the collagen, but there's tons of places with no receptors, but there's nothing in the body that lacks thyroid receptors. And some are different. There's different categories of receptors, but every cell in your body depends upon having just the exact right balance of thyroid hormones.
Yeah. And it's, the body normally does a pretty good job of keeping that stuff straight. Yeah.
So I'm curious because, last time you were on the podcast, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 years ago. The time is just, it's flying by. But after we had you on the podcast, we did the Metabolic Reset Diet, and we, spent a month in that system, and it felt great, and it was an awesome reset, and I highly recommend it. But, I'm listening to you here and I'm thinking, oh, I should do this one too, because I want to do all of these things so I can try them out and test them and just see how, they affect my body, and that helps me help people and all that good stuff. But as a listener, I'm wondering if you're thinking to yourself, this seems like this could have some beneficial effects for me. I don't think currently have any thyroid issues, but maybe there is a little brain fog. Maybe there is a little extra weight gain. What would you say to the listener in which path to go down first? Would they be a better candidate for this metabolic reset path? Should they try the thyroid first and kind of clean that up a bit? Kind of give them a sort of protocol for how to best navigate this, because you have so many wonderful offerings.
Yeah, great question. So if someone knows they have thyroid disease, for sure, take a look at the Thyroid Reset Diet. And it's a pretty simple thing. It's really saying, here's the foods that are just out of control for iodine, and you want to watch out for those. And here's good substitutes for them. And once you understand that, that can work with any regime you do. If you're paleo, autoimmune paleo, those that are plant-based, gluten-free, or just healthy diet, anything. It's actually pretty easy because any food category you think of, there are a couple of iodine outliers, but there's a ton of things that are not iodine outliers. So once you figure out the big things to avoid and work around, you do what you would otherwise. And on the other hand, if your struggle is more about the weight, the metabolism, the energy, you've never suspected thyroid disease, you've been told it's normal, then yeah, look at the Metabolism Reset Diet. Many have concerns about their thyroid and their metabolism. And in those cases, I encourage them to learn about the key foods that might be really harming their thyroid. And once they know that, it's very easy to do something like the metabolic reset because I'm already avoiding the iodine outliers in that protocol anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a double whammy.
Yeah.
And and I want to refer back to podcast 169 for our audience too, because that was where we really dive into that book and really take a look at the metabolic piece of it. So
yeah.
Highly recommend folks go listen to that one as well.
Yeah.
You can have a marathon.
Because it's the thing. If there's anything that is really just sticking out to me as we go through this, besides the fact that you can get iodine from skincare, is just how interconnected these systems really are, which can sometimes feel overwhelming, right? You're like, oh man, all of this stuff is connected together. How do I know if, doing X is affecting Y or whatever? But the other thing that's coming out of this is like exactly what you just said. In the metabolic reset diet, you're probably avoiding most of these things, right? So it's like you can kind of just jump in and take a little bit from here and a little bit from here, for information wise. I'm going to skip these foods and then I'm going to do it from this energy perspective, and get the kind of the best of both worlds and really affect two of the primary drivers of, I guess, what would be considered modern Western disease in that your metabolism, and then obviously, the thyroid affecting the metabolism, but everything else that goes on. I mean, we are so inundated as a country and a society with just, and this is not the right word, but broken metabolisms. There's nothing wrong with the metabolisms. They've all adapted to what we're doing to them, right? They're doing what they're supposed to do. It's just wrong.
Right.
We need to turn this stuff around, So I think it's really timely. Yeah.
Well, in terms of the last 3 books that I've written, it was about what I saw as the biggest issues we face. Non-communicable disease. So all the things that cluster under diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver, many cancers, many versions of brain degeneration. Yeah, they come down to a couple of core issues. And barring thyroid disease, the 2 biggest core issues are a chronic stress response, HPA dysregulation. And that's what I had written the Adrenal Reset Diet about. And then we see issues about poor fuel utilization, poor metabolic health. And that was the second one. So these are the biggest drivers I see behind just chronic disease.
Well, thank you so much for your contribution, honestly, because, we kind of live in a bubble sometimes where we think that these conversations are going on everywhere. And, a lot of our friends, a lot of the colleagues we have, are talking about these things, but on a larger scale, like this information is still in a pretty small corner
Circles.
of medicine and of health and of wellness. So I just really want to say thank you for the contribution to the larger conversation, because it really does make a difference for people to pick up a book and really digest this information. And you make it so easy for people, no matter like what you said, no matter what diet you're on, no matter what you subscribe to, these are ideologies that everybody can understand and digest and get behind and make improvements to their health. So thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, I'm doing my best.
Yeah, you are. You're doing a great job.
Yeah. Well, and like I've said, I don't know, probably 15 times so far on this podcast, like our circle is so much in this kind of paleo rooting and grounding, and it's something that when it comes to making recommendations as our sphere grows, and we are coming in contact with people who are less and less interested in that particular, modality of health. Your book, The Metabolic Reset Diet, has been one that we've handed out, and gifted and recommended to people who are kind of outside of that world, because it's like exactly like what Vanessa was just saying. It's very palatable, and it's like it doesn't throw any dogmatic food flags, where you're like, oh, you guys, and you're trying to get me to eat broccoli with no butter or whatever,
Yeah.
So it's,
I'm on a ghee only diet.
That's one of the few I haven't heard of.
Yeah.
Oh,
we're inventing it. It's coming out soon.
It's coming. It'll be here.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Christensen. Again, it's just such a pleasure. And is the book currently out? It is out and available now?
As of January 19th. It's available for pre-order right now.
Okay,
at
great.
the time we're
Awesome.
speaking.
Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, I highly recommend folks check it out. Check out your work. Follow along with you and what you're up to, because you're just an amazing resource. And obviously just like a genuine hearted person, which is what, which makes the difference for people, like to really get this message. So I just appreciate it.
Oh, you guys are sweet. Thank you so much. Fun to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We try.
I'm blushing here.
Good.
So what's the, what are the best places to find you? Because I know you've got a ton of good videos and really just helpful information on your website. Is that the best place, or have you migrated to Twitter?
I do have just a few little things that go on Twitter, but no, the website's really the center of all that. drchristianson.com. That's the center of all things.
Awesome.
The mothership.
Awesome. All right. Cool. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
It sounds awesome. Take care of yourselves.
Oh, thank you.
That's all she wrote, folks. I hope you guys dug that podcast. We always like having Dr. C on. He's so articulate and he's so dialed in, endocrinologist. He has the opportunity in that world to be very separate from everyone, because it's a specialty that like most people know what a cardiologist is. Not everybody knows what an endocrinologist is, and so he takes that world very seriously and makes it into an outward, like, facing situation, that's approachable situation for people. And thank you for that word. And that's the thing. We love his books. We love having him on the podcast, and you guys should go check out what he's got going on.
Yeah. Get in where you fit in with him, because he's up to cool stuff. Just had to throw in like a little gangster rap vibe there at the end.
Yeah. Sure.
And if you guys are enjoying the podcast, as always, we just request that you leave us a 5-star review, maybe write some nice words, a positive review for us, and we
share, follow.
What?
Share, follow.
Exactly. And that is all.
We'll
see you guys next week.
Bye.
Love you. Bye.